Yes. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday, January 13th, 2021 meeting of the Chappaqua Central School District Board of Education. The board has just come out of a joint work session with the town board regarding the form-based code. We had exited executive session prior to that, so we will just start off this meeting with a motion and a second to convene the school board public session.
I move.
We have a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. I just would like to note today that Holly McCall is with us, but she is attending by Zoom. So I will invite everyone to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so this is our first regular meeting since the new year, so I want to wish everyone a very happy and peaceful and safe 2021. I would like to just very briefly touch on recent events, and you've received communications from the superintendent and myself, but I just want to very briefly note the attack on our democracy that took place on January 6th, the attack on our Capitol, and the violence and destruction and deaths that took place. We hope that you found our message helpful with your students, with your children. Just want to share a quote with you that I read recently from Coretta Scott King in her book, My Life with Martin Luther King, where she says, "Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. You do not finally win a state of freedom that is protected forever." So there are two things we saw that I'd like to note briefly. We saw a challenge to our democracy. It was challenged and it was reaffirmed. And the second thing we saw was a double standard in America and the difference in law enforcement on January 6th and during the Black Lives Matter protests, showing a gross discrepancy in how people are treated based on race and ethnicity. And these two factors really illustrate the importance of the role of education in our society. And it's to educate our children to be intelligent, informed, and active participants in civic society, and to support a curriculum and school culture based on the values of anti-racism, equity, and social justice. So today, we are going to have two presentations. One is going to be on the budget, but one is going to be a second presentation of tonight of our consultants who have looked at the town's proposed form-based code and have come up with enrollment projections, building capacity, and fiscal analysis. So we will move to that presentation prior to the superintendent's report today. And after the presentation, we will take comments and questions from the audience for our consultants. So at this point, I would like to let our consultants introduce themselves and take it from there.
Chris Brown with the Chase & Companies.
Eric Kyer, KGD Architects.
Frank Robinson, E-Consult Solutions.
And Peter Angelides, E-Consult Solutions.
Allison, I'm sure. Allison Sloto, Side Patrick and Giselle, attorney for the Board of Ed.
Okay, so David, did you want to bring up their presentation?
And I'll just precede the presentation by saying something that I mentioned at the end of our joint board session. So I just want to be clear that the school board and the school administration and the school district, we are all committed to welcoming and educating all children that come to this district. What we're interested in doing is getting accurate data so that the town can make informed decisions with respect to the form-based code and impacts to the school district, and so that the school district can plan adequately for the new students that we can anticipate having. So I just want to make that point very clear as we proceed with our consultant's analysis. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thanks for going right into it. Thank you, everyone, for having us up here. So my name is Peter Angelides, and I will go through the majority of eConsult's part, and what is, oh darn, so the clicker is not functioning. And one more, okay, thank you. I'll talk about most of the work we did. I'll pass on to Frank, who will finish off with property tax analysis, fiscal analysis of property tax, and Eric will talk about the capacity analysis. I'm going to start by basically laying out some facts. What do those facts mean for enrollment projections based on what we have currently in the school district? In other words, the existing housing stock. If we have new units, what can we expect from the new units? And how does that impact the enrollment projections? Those are the basic questions I'll be addressing for the next few minutes. And let's start by looking at a little bit of history. Good, thank you. It's fine. So this is the, we're going to start by talking about a little history, enrollment history. What we see on the chart on the left is the enrollment history of the school district over the last 10 years. A high of 4,000, well, high forever, but over the last 10 years, the high point is 4,083 students. Currently, it's 3,556 students as of the current school year. The chart on the right side, the green line is exactly the same thing, but overlaid on that is the enrollment in kindergarten and first grade, which have both declined at a less steep rate than the overall enrollment has. I have the magic touch apparently. Thank you. The next slide shows on the left how does kindergarten and first grade compare now to what it was 10 years ago. And what you see is kindergarten is down to 91% of what it was 10 years ago. First grade is 72% of what it was 10 years ago, although I suspect that will go up next year. Kindergarten and first grade lag each other by 1 year, and we expect an uptick. To the right is a different kind of data set, and again, these are just existing data out there. What are the birth rates like? Kids come from somewhere, and looking at birth rates is very useful for that. So, and what we see is the birth rate when it says 2010, 2011, what it really means is the birth rate 6 years before that. So kids go to school when they're about 6, so that's when we start. And what you see is that the birth rates in the Chapman School District, that's the darkish line below, have really shrunk quite a lot. 65% of what they were 10 years ago. In Westchester County, it's 86%, and in New York City and New York State, those birth rates are also down from where they were 10 years ago, although not as much. So the basic idea is there aren't as many kids out there as there were 10 years ago, in whatever jurisdiction you look at. And the last bit of data is exactly that data that shows, and we'll see this similar chart throughout the presentation, so I will go through it very quickly. Very far left where it says birth 6 years earlier, that's again data from New York State, and that's births in the school district. The green is the kindergarten enrollment, and then all the others are the various grades over the last 10 school years. And again, you can see that the enrollment has declined to 3556.
Can I ask you, I'm sorry, can I ask you a question? Because one thing that I'm unclear on is when you talk about birth rates, and we have so many families, obviously people live here and have children while they live here.
But we also have so many families who come to our district if they've had kids, maybe they were living in the city, or maybe that it's not an uncommon thing for people to only come here when they have school-age children. How is that sort of reflected here?
Well, that's a great question. Let's get into it a little bit. You're absolutely right. So if you look at the green number on this one, you'll see that it's a lot bigger than the birth. So kids are coming from somewhere. I mean, you have more kindergartners than you have live births. So we're assuming that ratio stays the same throughout. It doesn't have to, but that's the general assumption. What that means is that yes, for every live birth you have here, you have some kids coming from somewhere else. Absolutely. And I'm going to get into birth rates in a little bit. And just to preview, you can think of the birth rates I'm going to show as, yes, it's a return to, or whatever the numbers are, they are, but think of it as a proxy for how many students are coming to the school district. So it's not just births, it's also births plus people moving in. It's both of those things together. So this is history, and what it shows is basically how many students were enrolled in each grade each year for the last 10 years. Well, what do we do with that? Well, we move forward one more. So that's all data so far. Now we're going to start with the calculations. And we're going to take a look at the progression rate calculation. And this is one of the big engines that drives the model. And the progression rate is simply the ratio of next year students to this year students. Translated to English, how many third graders wind up becoming fourth graders? Or how many sixth graders wind up becoming seventh graders the next year? Now, the most common way for that to happen is that the sixth grader comes back to school next year as a seventh grader. But it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes that sixth grader moves away. Sometimes a seventh grader moves into town from somewhere else. The progression rate, the enrollment data is net of all that stuff, and therefore the progression rate is 2. In other words, the progression rate automatically includes people moving in, people moving out, people graduating, whatever they're doing, that's already in the progression rate calculation. And I'd like to point out that all the way at the bottom, the last row is the 5-year average. So we averaged the most recent 5 years, because things vary from one year to another, but over time averages matter. And what you see is fairly interesting. So the green all the way to the left is kindergarten. That's simply the ratio of births 6 years earlier to number of kindergarten students. So addressing your question from earlier, 2.18. So there are more kindergarten students than there are babies, which means they're coming from somewhere. They're born elsewhere and move in. But then after that, you see that the progression rate is really never more than 1.05, and most of the time it's like 1.01, 1.0, 0.99. In other words, the class sizes don't get a lot bigger as you go up in the grades. So it's a fairly flat school district. The number of first graders and the number of 12th graders is fairly similar. There are fewer first graders, but it's not a dramatic difference. In some places you see that there's an inverted pyramid. The higher you go, the more kids you have. That is not the case here. And the important part of that, another important part, is that what happens in kindergarten echoes through the system pretty significantly. So what you see in kindergarten becomes true later on, or it matters for years afterwards. It matters so much that we've actually built 3 scenarios to take a look at what's likely to happen. Now, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, obviously. We don't know how many kids are going to be born. We don't know how many people are going to move into town. But we can tell you how many have in the past, and the green line there is the live birth over the last 15 years, between 2002 and 2017, so not literally the last 15 years, but 15 years. And over the last 8 years of those, the average birth rate, the average number of births in Chapel was, in the school district, was 110 births. In the 8 years before that, it was 160 births on average per year. And then over the whole time frame, it's 135 births per year. so an average rate between 110 and 160. So these are the three scenarios that we've modeled, that we've looked at for what's the enrollment going to be like. And you can think of the 110 as, this is what's going on right now. Most recent data is 110 births per year times the multiplier for kindergartners, and that's how many kindergartners will enter the system and therefore go all the way through. Taking a longer view, it's 135, and as you'll see, that gets you back to where you were sort of at your peak. And looking at a pretty high birth rate period relative to the last 16 years, the 2002 to 2009 period, it's 160 births per year. And if that persists over a long period of time, that will have significant impacts on the number of school kids in the school district. So what we have done with this is, let's start out, we've done three scenarios, and we use the 110 one just to illustrate how the calculations work. So this next slide, slide 11, is the enrollment projection with the existing housing stock before we add anything new, assuming 110 births per year after the 2023-24. So again, we already know how many kids were born for the next 3 school years. Then after that, we are using our estimates of 110, or the scenario of 110. And if you go to the 110 and then the multiplier between 110 and kindergarten, and then roll through the system using the progression rate, this is what happens. And I'll show you this instead of just tell you in a minute, but this is what happens is you wind up with this total school enrollment almost exactly where it is today, maybe a little more than 1% higher than where it is today, under this scenario. And under you can see these are the 3 scenarios. So the second column is the one I just showed you, the 110 bursts. The third column is 135 bursts. The fourth column is 160 bursts. And at the bottom, you're either 3597 students in year 2034 to 2035. You're either at approximately 3,600 students, 4,230 students, or 4,860 students.
Can I ask a question at this point?
Sure.
So how do these numbers, whether they do or not, how would you account for a factor such as COVID, where you see a lot of movement out of the city and into the suburbs? And I would say that I believe our housing stock is moving much quicker than it was before on the real estate market. So could you talk about that variable?
Sure. We don't specifically model COVID here, and COVID is the exact impact of COVID is no one really knows yet. It's likely to be a 2-year phenomenon. What happens after that, no one really knows yet. My best guess is that it will accelerate some things that would have happened in a couple of years, but if they happen now instead of 2 years from now, it's just a 2-year shift in time as opposed to a fundamental change. But we don't know. And you can use the scenarios as guidance at some level. So if you think COVID does have a big impact, then you might not go with a 110 scenario. You might think, well, that's recent history, but COVID is, if we think that COVID has, or whatever, has caused greater interest in the school district, then maybe you look at the 135 scenario or the 160.
Right, and also to Hillary's point, when people do move into the district, they usually bring kids with them rather than wait and have the live births here. So I guess what we would be seeing is not one child, but we'd be seeing a family perhaps with 2 children already, or perhaps with 1 child and then they have more kids as they live here. So it's sort of to me, that's a possibility of a small exponential factor there. That's something that happens in 1 or 2 years, but then continues to have an impact.
I think you would look at the higher scenarios for that example. So think about 135 bursts is not, obviously you have more kids in that. So what happens is you have someone move in with 1 kid, and then they have the second one or the third one. That's what shows up in the live births.
Right, so it might be more realistic to look at scenario 2, not because of the number of births, but perhaps because of what we're going through in current times.
If you think, sorry, yes.
No, that's okay.
If
I'm
you
done.
think that COVID is going to have a big impact in that way, then yes, that would be the appropriate thing to do.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that we don't know, but it's something that we have to take seriously.
Absolutely. The other thing to consider is that people can't simply move into Jericho. They need to have a house to move into. So it also requires that people are moving out at a greater rate than they otherwise were. For the existing housing stock, they have to empty out before they can get refilled with
Right.
kids.
Sorry, I don't want to monopolize the time. I just want to say that the dynamic we see in this district is right now we have more than 50% of the people who live here do not have children in the school district, which is unusual, and what generally happens is houses are sold by people who no longer have kids, and then people with kids buy the houses. So it's not as if people will move out with their kids to sell their houses. People,
Yep, absolutely.
it'll be the empty nesters moving out.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you think that that's going to be a bigger impact, bigger thing in the future, then that's when you start using 135, 160s scenarios as your guiding light as opposed to the 110.
Okay.
That's a great discussion point. Okay, I've unfortunately left you with boring numbers to look at. Let's get a picture. This is the same thing I just showed you, just in table form. This is the graph. So if you're looking at the 110, basically what's going on now, continuing on to the future, you see enrollment's basically flat. It doesn't change that much. Go to the 135 scenario, which is the average of the last 16 years, then enrollment grows steadily over time. At the end of our forecast period, 2035, 15 years from now, it's at 4,231, which, as I understand it, is approximately your peak enrollment, approximately. And then at the much higher birth scenario, you're up to 4,855. Okay, so those are the forecasts with the existing housing stock. Let's take a look at what happens if you build new units. How much do those contribute to school children population growth? And to do that, we use multipliers. This is a very standard technique, and a multiplier is a number of school kids per unit, and it varies by unit type. So a single-family house with 3 bedrooms is different from a owner-occupied condominium multifamily of 2 bedrooms. They're all different. And we've developed multipliers for you specifically for this project that are based on the most recent data that are available and that are based on geography that's very similar as we can possibly get to the school district. It's based on U.S. Census data, the American Community Survey, and we did it by first identifying what are comparable areas. And that's what you see here. The green is New York, the bluish color is Connecticut, the dark green is the school district, and it sort of picked the minimum size that we could get so we'll have enough data to do accurate calculations. And what our analysis does is basically takes a look at what's actually going on the ground and say, okay, well, of the apartments of these types, houses of these types, how many school kids are there? And it's multiplier. What's the average number of school kids that really exist out there? Public school kids, not all kids. And so these are the communities that we have used in Westchester County and then in Fairfield County, UK. If I remember that right. Okay. So what are the multipliers? We have, again, a different multiplier for every unit type, and also for whether the unit is affordable or market rate. And so the left side of this identifies the units. It's either a single family unit, like a detached house or a townhouse or something like that, or a multifamily unit, which you have a building with more than one family occupied it. And again, further broken down into owner occupied versus renter occupied, and then broken down further by number of bedrooms. There's a lot of multipliers out there. For example, if you are talking about a market rate building with 100 units, and all of them are 2-bedroom renter occupied units, then you only need the one multiplier. You look down the market rate column to the multifamily renter occupied apartment with 2 bedrooms, and you see the multiplier is 0.33. So if you have 100 units, you would expect there to be 33 school kids, public school kids, in that 100 units. Okay, so those are the multipliers. Now we need something to multiply them by, and that's new housing development. So the next slide.
Can you go back, hold on, can you hold on the slide?
Absolutely.
You said that you use these multipliers and use this PUMS data with Northern Westchester County and all these other areas that sort of look like ours. Did you look at the multifamily complexes we have in our town? We have about 8 or 9 of them, and see what the density loads are there.
Say that again?
Did you look at the multifamily complexes we have in town? We have about 8 or 9 condo complexes, and do we take a look at the density levels there? Because wouldn't that have a pretty good, wouldn't that give you a pretty good indication of who's living there for our school district? I don't think I'm not articulating myself correctly.
Using the, those numbers don't feed into this.
Pardon me?
So the short answer is no, those numbers aren't.
But that data is combined with these other PUMS data. Wouldn't it be interesting to take a look at just our town to see what the density in our town is in these condo complexes? Or am I being too simple here?
I think what the PUMS data is giving you population and child age residents. You can't get that information from the development, by development. It's not, you can't drill down at that level of detail.
I'm trying to follow up on Vicky's question, I think. So I would think we have that in the district. We would know where children live and what their addresses are, and we should be able to find out, and not give you that information, but at least give you numbers on how many children live in specific condo complexes.
I think that's feasible, but that's, you're sampling just one particular project versus.
Absolutely, this is a broader span across. Looks like Yorktown and Somers and Bedford, Katona, Lewisboro, Byram Hills, Firecliff, Ossining. But that would give you just what's happening in Chappaqua or Newcastle. Does that not make sense, or is that not?
It makes sense, but it will be hard to validate.
Pardon me?
It will make sense as a cursory thing, but it'd be hard to validate with just the isolated numbers. It's better to use the multipliers.
But why would it be hard to validate? If we had a list of all the children in the district who live in specific complexes, and again, not by name, just by numbers, so we can say in Ledgewood Commons there are, I have the numbers here somewhere, but they're like 100 units and 200 kids. And in, what's it, Apple Tree Close? What's the name of it? Yeah. Or, I don't even know the names of all the complexes, I should know them better. If we looked at the amount of school children in those complexes, and we're going to build 1 and 2, although if we're building 3-bedroom units downtown, right in the center of town, wouldn't that best match what's already in our town versus what's around the whole northern Westchester?
And I'm not the demographer, the analyst. I think it's probably good information to have. but you're not taking into consideration price point, all the other things that might vary with a small sample size like that, and so you're trying to normalize it over a broader geographic.
I know, we're normalizing for Northern Westchester, but we're talking about Newcastle right here.
Yep.
And I think that's where I have a concern, is that it seems like, you know, people always say they move to Newcastle or Chappaqua for the schools. So if we have a high, and again, I might be totally wrong, maybe the densities are low in these condo complexes. It just seems that that would best mimic what the town wants to do downtown by building a higher density of housing in a specific area. You've got 8 or 9 specific areas with a higher density of housing.
So I think, Warren, your point is very well taken, and I believe we attempted to address those concerns by building out 3 different scenarios, rather than sharing just one scenario based on current enrollment projections that we saw in the draft. Because we tried to account for what if more students moved into complexes that were designed for 1 bedrooms, but they really turned out to be 2 bedrooms at the end of the day.
Right.
So what we felt was our responsibility to the community and to the town board is that we didn't just build one scenario based on projections, but that we built out 3. So people could really understand what could happen based on nuances associated with building projects that are unknown. And so to your point, if there were more children in condominium complexes in our community and compared to other communities, then the number that you would really want to be looking at in terms of making decisions would possibly be scenario 2, not scenario 1. If we're concerned that the 1-bedroom apartments will turn into 2-bedroom apartments, even though they're not slated that way, or 3, like we've seen in other complexes within our community real time, then we want to really consider what's happening within scenario 2, not scenario 1, and that's why there's 3 projections for the town's consideration being presented tonight to the town and to the community.
Understand that.
Right.
I just think that if we look, I mean, again, this is data that's looking at a broad brush, which is great. I think we need to take a look at this, but I think we could also drill down a little closer and take a look at those complexes. And maybe I'm totally wrong. I mean, I'm not the expert here. I'm just a guy asking questions, because I saw it as to me, it just that might be something we could take a look at. I guess not. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Holly McCall has a question. She's the board member who's on Zoom. So David, can you get Holly on the screen somehow, or is that?
Holly, if you unmute yourself, we can hear you too.
Right. Maybe you don't have to come off of the slides, but maybe we can just hear Holly's voice. Oh, there she is. Okay. Hi, Holly.
All right. So I think that you actually went back to slide 17 after you've gone ahead to the projections. Is that right?
Yeah, just about the projections.
Okay. So actually, after you do slide 19, it might be a better time for me to ask my question then.
Okay, Holly, we'll get back to you after slide 19.
Thanks.
Sorry. Okay.
There you go. Okay, so this is the slide that combine. Well, this is again data. Each row of this is a different housing development. The first 3 rows are housing developments that we know are on their way, either finished or about to be finished. So we have an understood completion date. And then the 4th row is really got the hamlet. And for each row, it says, what is this housing development going to bring? What kind of units are going to be in the development? And the new developments are basically all multifamily, 1, 2, or 3 bedroom. And the hamlet has, we're assuming multifamily development, and then at the same time losing some 1, 2 family units, so we'll have relatively fewer of those. So this is how many new units are coming over the next, I guess, 10 years, according to the assumptions that we made. The first 3 are based on data, and the fourth one, the hamlet, is based on the DGEIS a document. That's how many, where we got the mix of 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms from. So again, this shows what we're going to be multiplying the multipliers by when we do that on the next slide. But I want to take your question now so that we...
Okay, so I'm looking at the information that was provided by the town for the estimate for the number of units in certain bedroom configurations. I'm wondering if you had looked at an alternate scenario where you projected out for the hamlet development with the ratio of 1 to 2 bedrooms of the most recent development to be built, 91 Bedford Road, because the ratio is flipped. There are more 2 bedrooms than 1 bedrooms in our most recent example, but we're looking at it with an assumption of a higher ratio of 1 bedrooms to 2. And I know we have gone back and forth with some concerns about not knowing how many bedrooms might be there, what control might be. So I'm actually wondering if you can look at an alternate scenario with that knowledge we have about the ratio of 91 Bedford.
So we have looked at that alternative scenario, and that we'll present in a little bit. So the answer is yes, we have looked at it. We have the results, not presented in the same way, but we have them a few slides down. So when we get
okay, so you got it as basically an adjustment factor further out.
Yeah, we show you what the numbers are based on this assumption, and then we have several alternatives. If instead of the same ratio of 1 to 2 bedrooms, you have relatively more 2 bedrooms, how does that impact the number of school kids? So we have that information. It's later in the slide deck.
Okay, and then another question I had was, it was mentioned that the current zoning actually allows a certain amount of build-out, and that is, I just wanted to clarify, that is built into your number for the hamlet. It's almost like a replacement for what could currently be built, right?
If the question was, are we assuming additional units being built that are not shown here, the answer is no. Right,
I just wanted to make sure that I understood that the current zoning that's been referred to, that there's certain allowable build-out that's still possible under the current zoning, that's not factored in here. We're looking at it assuming that it's all under the new zoning.
That's correct. We did not investigate the scenario of build out under current zoning. That's right.
Okay. And now, was that in the DGEIS?
Oh, I don't remember.
Okay, thank you.
Allison, do you know the answer to that?
Offhand, I would think that it would be, but with whatever numbers the town consultants use, like the Rutgers multipliers, because the DGEIS does need to consider what's called the no action scenario, which is essentially what we're talking about here, like what would it look like in 15 years' time if we didn't enact the new zoning. So I think that is probably what the town board comments were going to earlier and asking if we had run that scenario.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to add to that, since it's the second time we're hearing the question, that the goal wasn't to have our consultants run around and analyze every possible scenario that could possibly happen. The goal was to analyze the impacts of the form-based code proposal as it was presented and the DGEIS. So while we can, do all kinds of permutations, what we're trying to do here is analyze the impacts of this particular proposal. So So that analysis is not relevant to the purpose, and we don't need to spend more money unnecessarily. But if anyone else at the town would like to do that analysis, of course they're welcome to do that analysis, because it's their project. This is information for them, so of course they're free to look into that. But for our purposes, we were looking at what we were presented with from the town.
Right, I think that's it.
I think it was a little bit more about knowing how this plays into the capacity piece later.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, the whole purpose of this and the task that you were given was to see how it would impact us under a change with the form-based code. It was not our task to determine the existing, to do this exercise for the existing zoning, because that wouldn't have made sense for us to do that at this point.
Right, I mean,
what a change would bring, because whatever happened under the existing zoning, we would address. We have to see how it would be impacted by the new zoning.
Okay, so what we have here, again, this slide is simply the new units that we did assume. 3 developments we know about, and then the 4th row is essentially what would come from the changed zoning. And the assumed completion date actually is over several years, because it takes a while to do that. And again, that was an assumption about the future. So there it is. Can we? Yeah. Thank you. The next slide just shows how the multiplier calculation actually works. Each row is a different type of unit. So some are market rate units, some are affordable units. And then the first column with numbers in it shows what the change in units is. So we're losing some single-family detached or single-family housing, adding multifamily housing. And then the next column of numbers, the public school age children multiplier, simply that multiplier that we saw in the slide 2 slides ago. And that gets you the number of public school age children. And to get to the bottom line, the number is 150 in the hamlet. And it's larger. That's just from the new zoning. So this number is simply just the hamlet. It's not the other 3 developments. So it's 150 new kids based on these multipliers, based on the 1-bedroom to 2-bedroom split that we talked about, is 150 new public school children. Next slide, please. And this slide does include the other 3 developments. So there are 30 students from those other developments. So the 30 plus the 150 we just talked about is 180 total additional students to the school district for new construction based on the unit mix and the multipliers that we talked about. And what you see here is each row is a different year. So the upcoming school year we'll see 13 new kids approximately from the Conifer building and 91 Bedford Road. The year after that will be 17 kids from the townhouses at Chapel Crossing, and then 150 kids spread out over 7 years after that from the hamlet. Now that timing is not set in stone, obviously, so it's possible that will extend longer to 15 years, 20 years. It's possible it can be done in less time. And I will also note that some of it is on private land. That's the column with 25s. That's all private land. But it also, a third of the school kids come from what is now public land that would have to go through a public process to actually be turned into housing. So it's only 100 kids from what is now private property.
So I just want to say, so just going back to slide 20 and also this slide, so if we flip the number of 1-bedrooms, because right now this is assuming that 2/3 of these new units would be 1-bedrooms, right? About.
Yep, that's right.
So that seems kind of unrealistic. So if we were to flip, I don't know, I guess we could do a calculation right now. If we were to assume that 2/3 were actually 2 bedrooms, that one, obviously the 150 would change. I wonder what that number We'd be, I wonder if someone could do back of the envelope.
It would change, and we've done that calculation, and it's later on the slide deck. So we will.
Oh, you did, sorry.
We did,
I
yes.
forgot. Okay, yeah.
We did.
What slide was that thing?
That was, I was just.
You
looking
did,
at
the last, yeah, yeah.
The last slide on
Last
issues
slide.
and discussions
It's
about
the discussion points.
the percentage difference and how that would raise the enrollment.
You did, yeah.
Yes, we did. And I would also point out that it's not a matter of simply
Page 30,
switching the
38.
numbers, because
Page 38.
the form-based code governs volume, and the number, you can't fit as many two-bedroom units. Two-bedroom units are bigger than one-bedroom units. So if you flip them, you'd have to cut the total number of units in order to make that fit. Okay, so the next slide, we're on slide 22, basically takes the additional kids, adds them in to the existing enrollment projection that we showed you several slides ago, and you see that the number of children increases because we've added 180 new children. So it's whatever we had projected before plus 180. That's how many children there will be. And we did basically that with all three scenarios. That's this numerical chart. And the numbers are graphed for you on slide 24. So you can see that under the 110 birth scenario, you do have an increase of approximately 221 students over 35 years. With the medium scenario, the number of births at 135, you go up to 4,411, and in the 160 birth scenario, you have 5,000 plus. So in terms of order of magnitude, it's the number of children from the development is relatively small compared to the assumption of live births and move-ins and that kind of stuff. Okay, that's where the real range comes from, those three scenarios, as opposed to the new development. All right, you have heard plenty from me, so I'm going to pass it on to Frank.
Well, the next slide, please. Just to finish out this section, and I know that this screen, but we wanted to look at was that what happens if you added in the out of district placement. So for students who go out of district for a number of reasons, if they had to come back in, making sure that they are accounted for. Historically, that has been 1 per 100. So we use that enrollment data to come up with these numbers. And what you'll see is that we line them up into categories that Peter's been talking about. So the 110 births, the 135, the 160. Just wanted to see that the correlation of growth correlates at the end. In the first scenario without units, stays consistent, 34 per year throughout. Adds about 1.1% to the total here. When you look at with the new units in that same scenario, increases 6.2%, 223 students. And then when you look at scenario 2, you're seeing a 19% increase in the without the new units, 681. And then with the new units is a 24% increase with 683. Last in the births for 160, the third scenario, you're looking at increase of 36.5%, 1,300 students approximately, and then finally in that last category, 41.0% with 1,493 students. So we wanted to look at the fiscal impact and how that affects the budget. And what you see here is just really a recap of the current school budget, which takes into account an enrollment, including out-of-school district of 3,590, I'll just highlight that the total is 128,035,721 per student. What we wanted to do is take a baseline of what this looks like with this projected unit. So just looking at different scenarios, a couple of things I would like to add. For the most part, we added a 2% inflation, but there were some categories that we did not do that in. So for one, estate sources, as we are projecting and the state has started to see, that has actually gone down to 9 million. Look at the most right column. Another area is the tax revenues. As last year, as the impact of COVID and other things that have happened, that revenue category has gone down as well. The last category I'll point you to is the uses of money and property tax. So assuming that for this year coming up, it's going to be $250,000. Again, all impacts of COVID, which brings the new budget into $130 million, which was a good baseline to start off, and this is the reason why this was important. What are the big takeaways? What we wanted to look at was that on the top line, you'll see that it says projected budget through 2930, scenario 1, without the Chapel Hamlet new units. And you see there's, for the most part, a correlation with the exception of the first year, where you see that 6.8 because of the different things that we talked about in the last time. So that is the property tax growth because of those scenarios. You look at the next year, you see that line is at 0.2%, but then throughout you'll see the consistency it ranging between 1.2, the highest being 3.2, going across. So for the most part, budget growth is consistent with the property growth within those numbers. When you go down to the projected 29 for scenario 1 with the Chapel Hamlet, there's still a correlation, as you'll see, but you'll see there's some numbers that are a little high, 3.4% in 2023, goes to 1.9, 2.7, and it kind of stays consistent. So it's not too much variation there, but these are some of the big takeaways that the budget growth, for the most part, are in line with the property tax rate. I'm not going to bore you with all these. What I want to let you know that these slides are here, and these are the numbers that we utilize to calculate those numbers we just looked at earlier. We looked at them with both. We have them in there with both without the Chapel Hamlet and with the Chapel Hamlet new units for all slides. So I'm going to skip these.
I'd like to just make a note, and this is really based on slide 29. Now, when we look at some of percentages of growth of property tax, and I know that you assumed 2% all around.
Not all around. In most places, talking with the budget office. That's what.
Okay. Right, all right. Because I just want to say, when I look at the growth of property tax, I think we have to be mindful that the tax cap legislation is not a 2% tax cap. It's the lesser of 2% or the CPI, whichever is less.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that doesn't affect your analysis. I just want people to realize when you see the certain percentage growth here, let's say 25 to 26, if you see a percentage growth of 2.7%, that's certainly going to be higher than the tax cap. We know that. Even if you see a percentage growth of something lower than that, 1.9 or 0.5, we don't know what the tax cap is going to be for that year. So I just want to say that your calculations are fine. It's just that we would probably have to exceed, we may not be able to meet the needs through the tax base based on what the tax cap is for that current year.
I understood, that's excellent feedback. One thing I'd like also to point out is that with new development, you also get new tax base. So in some cases, the property tax rises not because the rate goes up, because the base increases. In other words, you're building new stuff.
Right.
That then becomes subject to property tax, so your property tax revenue will increase even if you don't change the rate.
So, yeah, sometimes that happens, except that, you know, based on the number of kids that we get, that could definitely offset the growth, the tax base growth. And also something we haven't talked about is whether or not, you know, what the kinds of developments this would be and whether that would attract Westchester County tax abatements, you know, like pilots, things like that. And also when you have corporate taxpayers, they oftentimes grieve their taxes so that if they have a store, it's not making as much money, then they, you know, they do tax certiorari and they grieve their taxes, and there are a lot of tax refunds, and then their tax rates go down. That happens quite often with these types of developments. So I don't know, I understand the tax growth, but I'm not that hopeful based on our experience here at Chappaqua with that. I mean, I'm hopeful that one day that would change, but that's not our current experience, past experience.
Good question.
Okay, just to finish with a quick couple of other slides. So basically what you see up here is the things graphed out. So normally you would want to see, you'll see a projection of growth that's proportional to what we just talked about. So the total budget projected without the Chappaqua Hamlet, with the first scenario, 1.68 billion, the middle growth, scenario 2, 1.95, and then 22.4.2. And then with, on the right-hand side, with the Chappaqua Hamlet units, you see slightly a little bit more, but again proportional, 1.76.3 to 104.5 to 32.2. Again, just noting what was said by the board president, keep that in account. But these are some similar numbers, proportional growth. I will leave those for people to read. I know that we need to move forward, but again, the growth is proportional to what was said, just with in mind what we was talking about. Just quickly to talk about just a couple of issues. This is a science and an art. So the science is what some of the things that we've talked about, the data and those things that from experience, but the art or some of the things that we don't know that you will always have to be adjusting for that is beyond us. So again, Peter talked about the real estate and talked about the backfill. You know, we don't know how many sales versus you know, who's coming in and what's happening with that. That will be an impact that we'll have that have to be continued to look at. We talked about we don't know the effects of COVID, and I will also say from the things that have happened last week that all have impact on the economy, on movement, on live births that we have to manage. And lastly, the change in the housing mix will have an impact. We looked at some scenarios here just to give a picture of what it could be. So these are more ranges than they are exact numbers. But if you take those percentages of one-bed units and converted them into two, this is what it could look like. So it was approximately 180, that's where we are. If it could increase 30%, approximately 225. If you convert 50%, it could be approximately 255, and then lastly 80%, approximately 300. And now I will turn it over to Eric.
So KGD architects were retained to perform a school capacity study. We assessed the 3 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and Morris Greeley High School. We evaluated the future enrollment increases, which are based on the housing transfers or turnovers, as well as the new construction in town. And we applied the New York State Education Department standards to the classroom capacities and their utilization rates. And ultimately, we consulted with the district administrators to factor in the unique educational specifications for the Chappaqua Central School District. As you all know, there's 6 schools in the district. Your grade level configurations K4, 5, 8, and 9, 12. You voted on that 20 years ago. And this slide also shows when some of these schools were built. So 20 years ago, you started building Seven Bridges School. Before that, you had 5 schools. Why did we add a school? Because the 3 elementary schools and the existing middle school at the time, which was a K-5 and 6-8 program, were reaching capacity. And you can actually historically go back farther to look at and analyze how this all happened. Back in the 40s, after World War II, the baby boomer population started. And between the mid-40s and the mid-60s, there was a significant population growth. You can see that in schools. You can see that on this chart right here, in fact. Look at the schools that were built during the baby boom population period. You had Roaring Brook built in 51, you had Grafflin built in 62, and you had Greeley built in 57. Those were all a factor of the fact that people were moving out of the city and the population was growing substantially after World War II. And so if you also look historically nationally, you'll see that in the 50s and 60s, schools were growing, the population was increasing. In the 70s and 80s, there was a little bit of a trough. And then in the 90s and 2000s, the population grew back because those baby boomers were having children and they were in the school districts. And so you can see the ebbs and flows over time of school districts and how their populations increase and decrease. So here's some of the historical data associated with that. Currently, we have 3,556 students, which is a historical low over the course of the last 20 to 25 years. The peak in 2007 was 4,254 students. That's a 700 student decline in the past 13 years. Again, it could be attributed to regular ebbs and flows. It could also be potentially attributed to 2008 recession, where it altered family planning, and a lot of properties, families have been holding on to their houses because of declining property values over that period of time, so that fewer kids are in the district at this point than there were 10 and 15 years ago. And you can see that at the elementary school, there's been a 30% decline over the past 13 years. In the middle school, 20% decline. And at Greeley, there's been a 15% decline in that period of time. We haven't torn down any houses. The houses are still there. So that same population could fit into the existing housing stock before any new buildings are built in town. So what was the process we went through? We analyzed the existing floor plans of all 6 buildings, schools. We met with the school principals to verify the instructional use of each of the classrooms and other teaching spaces, and planned the capacity for each of those spaces. The school has a model program, and we confirmed that we were meeting that model program. And that includes the preferred class sizes for all the different grades. So for example, in kindergarten, your preferred class size or maximum capacity is 20 per classroom. First grade is 23, and second grade and beyond is 25. And so then we created a spreadsheet of all the physical classroom educational instructional spaces in all 6 schools. Numbered the rooms, the amount of square footage in each, and the current square footage and current use of each. And then we also calculate for program efficiencies at each grade level, as well as room utilization rates at the secondary school levels, and we'll get into that in a little greater detail in a second. So at the elementary schools, the K-4 program, to establish a target capacity, we multiplied the number of homerooms by the target class size and number of grades in the school. And then we reduced that target capacity by an efficiency factor of 0.85. And this accounts for the annual fluctuation in grade level size and the districting that we have, because we have 3 different elementary schools. So in 5th grade, for example, you may have, I'm going to use a number, 100 students in 5th grade at Grafflin, and then if you go to Roaring Brook, there might be 85, and if you go to West Orchard, there might be 92. So there's a fluctuation that we have to factor in there. We're never going to mate the capacity at each one of the schools at the same time. So the functional capacity for each of the elementary schools is 521 students. We'll get into in a second how we achieve that. But basically, it's multiplying the number of homerooms by the number of grades, by the target class size. And there's a factor, we put a bubble classroom in there so that if there's one grade that is larger, that there's an extra classroom that can carry through the grades. And then we also look at the common spaces, because it's not just the general classrooms that we have to look at, but we have to make sure that the cafeterias and gyms and libraries all can accommodate that additional population. So this is a spreadsheet. It's a partial spreadsheet for Roaring Brook Elementary School. This actual spreadsheet has far more number of rooms, but we just wanted to basically give you kind of an idea as to how we developed this so that you can understand the process. First couple lines is the school name. In this case, it's Roaring Brook, and the location, and then the type of classroom it is, or type of teaching space. We go into the target class size. You can see the third line here. It says target class size 20, 23, 25. That's based on the educational specifications. We multiply it by that efficiency factor at 0.85, and that gives you an individual classroom or teaching space functional capacity. And you multiply all those classrooms together, and that brought us up to that 521 number. And this was for Roaring Brook, but West Orchard and Grafflin, all 3 of them are identical. The middle school and high school is slightly different in terms of developing a capacity, because the students move around all day long. And so here we counted all instructional spaces for the capacity analysis. And there are multiple methodologies for calculating, but what we utilize is the target class size per room, and we multiply that by the efficiency factor, similar to the elementary school, and then a room utilization rate, which is based on the number of periods per day that you're actually going to use that room. And it depends on the type of room that it is. A general purpose, general classroom typically is used, and we use the block schedule here, but state standards uses a 9-period day, so that's what we use generally for this analysis. A general use classroom is 7 out of 9 periods. A special or science classroom or lab type of space is usually 5 out of 9. And so that brings your functional capacity down somewhat. And then we also, similar to the elementary school, confirm that all the other common spaces are large enough to meet the population as the population increases. So this shows for the Seven Bridges School, the line that's highlighted is that room utilization rate. Everything else is the same. And when you multiply that, the Seven Bridges School has a capacity, functional capacity of 774 students. You do the same thing for Bell, and it's a little bit less, 701 students. And for Horace Greeley, it's 1,480 students. And so the functional capacity, if you met the capacity for each of the individual each of the individual schools and added them all together, that would be 4,518 students. We then took the capacity study that we did and we overlaid it onto the enrollment study that you heard a few minutes ago. And this has the 3 different scenarios that were discussed: the 110 births, the 135 births, and the 160 births. And just to reiterate that, the 110 was basically for the last several years, it's an average. The 160 was for the average in the 2000s years, and the 135 was the average over the course of the past 16 years combined. And so we showed all 3 of those categories here with and without the new housing units, but we just, for the sake of this chart here, highlighted the scenario 2, which was the average between the 2, or the average for the longer period of time. And it shows that at the elementary schools, you don't have an issue for the next 5 to 7 years. At some point it goes from green, which means no capacity issue, to yellow, which means that you start to be borderline, to red, which means that you have a capacity issue. And you'll see that in general, the school that has the biggest capacity issue is Grafflin, because Grafflin is immediately adjacent to downtown, and if there's additional development in the downtown area, that would be the elementary school that would be most affected by development. And this goes to show that what we were just looking at is elementary school kids. They're kids that are 6 to 10 years or 11 years old. Once you get to middle school, they're flowing up through. The middle school here you can see is green for a longer period of time. That's because they have to matriculate up through the different grades. And so it doesn't become an issue at the middle school for 10 to 12 years before it starts to get borderline. And where we're seeing the challenge would be at Bell, because Bell again is in part of the district that potentially with additional housing units in the downtown area would be more affected, as well as, if you recall, the Bell capacity is somewhat slightly lower than the Seven Bridges capacity. And so that once you start looking out 13 to 15 years, you can see that Bell potentially would then have a capacity issue. And then finally at Horace Greeley, you can see up and down, at least for the next 15 years, there isn't a capacity issue, whether you're looking at scenario 1, 2, or 3, there still is capacity available at Horace Greeley High School. Here to answer questions.
Does the Board of Education have any additional questions before we open it up to the community?
I guess so with the elementary school, I guess I'm just stating the obvious, but in the 6 to 9 years, then it's not a matter of redistricting, right? We will have to build onto a school or 2. I mean, is that the assumption, I guess?
Well, you have to look at the 3 different scenarios. If you believe the middle scenario, which is that there will be an average of about 135 births per year, that yes, over the course of the next 10 years, you're going to first have a problem at Grafflin, and then you potentially would have a problem at Bell.
And that's a
Right, but I know,
scenario
but
too.
because you said that, it says based on scenario 2, Grafflin will exceed capacity in 6 to 9 years, and West Orchard, Bolingbrook will be slightly over capacity. So that tells me we'll have to build on to an elementary school, because we can't redistrict.
If this scenario holds true, that 135 births per year, that yes, in the long term, all 3 elementary schools would be over capacity, and you'd be looking at additions or reworking the program. Now, people have asked in the past, well, if you look back 20 years, we had over 1,600 students in the elementary schools at that time. How did we handle that? Well, your program, your educational program changes, and you've done different things in your buildings to meet the 21st century next generation educational goals that you have for your district and for your students, and that takes additional space. And so some of those rooms that were originally used as general purpose classrooms are now used for more specific programs which accommodate fewer students or accommodate, has a different utilization rate, which lowers the overall capacity in the building.
Holly, did you have a question?
Actually, Vicki asked my question. I'll answer that.
Can I go back to Frank and ask a question about slide 29, which is still giving me trouble? I don't know why I'm still struggling with that one. The budget projections and your percentage numbers for percentage growth of budget throughout those years, and I'm trying to do the math and I'm getting something wrong. So can you explain those numbers again, the percentages?
Sure.
On slide 29, so you're going, like, we see the enrollment projections with and without the new units.
Yes.
How are you calculating that percentage of growth budget?
So that calculation actually is shown. So if you look on slide 30, you'll see the growth percentage of the growth there, 1.9, and that's from the growth of the budget from one year to the next. And Jane, you can help me out with this one. I see you there. And that's so that's the growth was calculated from the first year to the next. So that's kind of where those numbers are coming from. I don't.
Are you plugging in? So you're plugging in the per pupil difference.
This is the overall growth expenditure.
So it helps to remember there are 2 things going on. One is overall inflation.
Right.
Cost per student is going up by 2%.
Okay.
But the number of students is also changing.
Right, and next, like from 2021 to from 21-22 to 22-23, it drops. Okay, the number of students.
Right, the number of students is going down, but at the same time, the cost per student is going. I'm sorry.
Okay, so this is how you're getting your percentage. Okay,
It's
to the next page, because I was looking ahead now it's making a little more sense. Okay, now I can see how you plug that in. Thank you. I was trying to look before it instead of after. Thank you.
And so can I follow up on that? When you get to 2030 and 2031, that's when we're over capacity at the elementary schools. And so the budget here, I mean, I guess clearly we're going to have some capital investments in that year. So
Those are not in here.
those are not in there.
This is scenario 1, so you don't reach those issues under scenario.
It's scenario, got it, right.
Capital.
But I guess we don't have a slide like this for scenario 2 and 3. No, we do. We do, but did you anticipate those capital improvements, which could be significant in the numbers? And if you didn't, that's okay. I just think that we can kind of work, we all have to talk through this, because we have our perspective and you have yours, and so I kind of see this as a work in progress here, so it might be helpful. I'm not quite sure how we go about thinking about what the expenditures would be, whether we'd have to pass a bond or not, and the construction costs and then the debt service and all of that. But for now, I'd just like to note that that's what would happen if we're in scenario 2. And as we discussed, scenario 2 is probably realistic because we have people moving in from COVID, and all the different factors. That it's the empty nesters moving out, people with new families. So I
You
think
usually
we put-
try to connect new capital improvements with the retirement of debt service. So when you're about to retire debt, that's a good opportunity because it doesn't have any tax impact to do additional work on your schools.
I guess we'd have to figure out whether we would be able to do that because the capacity needs would outweigh that. We would take over at that point.
I think at some point too, we have to talk about, what information do we feel like we need to present to the town board versus what information should the town board think about asking their own consultants to gather based on the information that we're providing them.
Right.
Right? Because our consultants have done their work that we've asked them to do. They're presenting it tonight. They're presenting it to the community. If there's still unknowns, or those unknowns that the board wants answered by our consultant team that we need to go back and examine, or those unknowns that we might suggest in our comments to the town board that they may want to further examine because they may need that information when they're making a decision.
Right.
So it's all about how, we shape what our role is given the context of this situation. Our role is also not to defend our data. This is our information. We've done our job. We're sharing that with you. You interpret and use that data how you see most appropriate, town board, in making your decision.
Right.
If we feel like we need to present more data on the district's behalf, then that's the kind of information that our consultants would need to gather. So I think outside of this meeting, we would need to just regroup and talk about, is there additional information we want to present to the town board for their consideration when they're making their decision?
Right.
Versus, town board, you may want to consider X, Y, and Z when you're working with your consultant team to get the information you need to make a decision.
Right.
So it's not going to be the town board asking our consultants to do work for
Right.
them. It's what work do we feel our consultants need to do for us to present that we want the town board to have.
And which we were hoping is that the work that they did tonight, that's what we're here, to share facts, that maybe that shines a light on some more information that they need in general to form a basis for their decision making. So,
Which I think is a really important distinction
Yes.
for our community to understand.
Right, but right now this is helpful in formulating additional questions, like, this need for, to build on to elementary schools, so now we can see where we're headed with that. And so the way I'm approaching this is what are the lists of issues that we will have to hand over to the town board, not necessarily going out and finding those answers, which we could also perhaps do internally, but
and some of this, it's very challenging. Like we said, there's just things that we will not know. And we look at those numbers, I was struck at the beginning seeing, you see the enrollment drop, and then you see that spike from this year with the increase in kindergartners that we could all sort of attribute to people moving out from the city during COVID. We don't know if people are staying. We don't know if that will continue. And so we're all making educated guesses based on data, and that's why we have to look at other scenarios. But ultimately, it's just our job to present the data as to what it could be, and then the town can take that and see how they can mold this zoning so that it will account for as many scenarios as possible.
Okay, thank you. So did you open up public comment? Does anyone on the board have any other questions from consultants? No. Okay. All right, so we're going to open it up to public comments, and what we'll do is we'll have the usual public comment rules. Please, identify yourself when you come up to the microphone, and please limit your comments or questions to 3 minutes, but we will allow the consultants to answer your questions. After your comments are completed, but just in the interest of time, we're going to ask that we not have a back and forth, but just ask your question, and hopefully they'll have an answer for you. Okay, yes, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm Sid Faulkson. I live at 97 Crossroads Road. I have a second grader and 2 other children who will be in schools one next year who's going to be starting kindergarten, and then a 17-month-old who's a couple years away. And I just want to start by thanking you for undertaking this important work, and also for holding the session in person so that we can all hear, in person and ask questions and, continue this process. I have 3 questions. Do you want me to ask them one and then wait for the consultant to answer, or just roll with all 3 and then see how we go?
Roll 3 and then.
Okay, all 3. Is that okay? Okay, let's have all 3 and...
Okay, great. So the 3 questions are related first to the assessment around birth rate. The second is around the selection of the PUMS areas. And the third is just a comment around the capacity analysis. So the first around birth rate is, from my perspective, birth rate is a function of many things. It's a function of the economy, of the general environment. But in this analysis, it doesn't look like the analysis has been undertaken in the 3 decades looked at to see in 2000 to 2010 what proportion of residents in certain age groups were. And my question is, if in the 2000 to 2010 decade, when the birth rate was the highest, was there a higher proportion of residents who were of childbearing age versus what they were in the preceding decade? And so rather than taking a look at just the overall average, should we not look at what the makeup of the residents are, and then look at understanding that there has been a significant churn and turnover in the housing market in the last year, and that may continue. Look at what is the age and makeup of the residents today, what do we think it will be in the next 2 to 3 years, and then use that data and that birth rate rather than just an overall average. Okay, so that's the first question. The second is around the selection of the PUMS area. It looks like the selection included Westchester and parts of Connecticut, and that the selection was based on geography alone. And I'd like to better understand what criteria was used in making that selection, because it doesn't appear that the quality of the schools and quality of school districts was a factor in the selection criteria. And then secondly, when I look at the average rent of the PUMS areas, it ranges from $1,400 a month to $1,800 a month. And we know from what the apartments are going for at 190 Bedford? 191, thank you. That those are on the market for $4,000 a month. And so just a look at the total, average home value, the total rental. Yes, am I going over 3 minutes? Is that?
The board can extend for 1 more minute.
Okay, great. So wait,
I'm sorry, we have to go through the process.
Absolutely, let her finish her question. She has 3 questions.
Yes, for 1 minute, we can extend, but that's the most that we have.
All right, I'll wrap up that question. What criteria was used for the PUMS analysis? And then the last around the capacity analysis. It's clear that the targets that were used are the state regulation, but not necessarily the ideal, and not necessarily what the classroom sizes are today. For example, at Roaring Brook, it looks like for first grade we've used 23 a classroom. I know for a fact last year they were around 17 to 19 a classroom. And for second grade, it looks like 25 a classroom, whereas this year they're 18 or 19 a classroom. And so rather than looking at what's the max that the state will allow, we need to be looking at what is the ideal and what is it today, which I think are the same, because I think the school board and the administration have done a good job of making sure that classroom sizes are small. And just to that point, there are studies that show that the smaller the classrooms are, so classrooms in K through 3 that are sizes of 13 to 17 as compared with 22 to 25, where on average those classrooms 2 months ahead of their peers, and an 8 to 9% advantage on reading and math scores. And the effects extend well past early primary years, demonstrating superior performance even through 7th grade. So So I really think when we look at the capacity analysis, we need to be looking at smaller class size, not just the state regulation. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, I think, would you mind if I kind of... Please. Yeah, okay, so the first question is on the residents of child rearing age, and how do you factor that into enrollment data, and should there be additional information that includes the makeup of the community when you're making those enrollment projections?
So I think those are all me. So the birth rate first. We batted around the birth rate quite a lot over time. That's why we have different scenarios. We have here's recent history, here's longer history. I think it's a pretty good range for what could happen. And remember, it's not just the birth rate by itself, it's the birth rate plus the move-ins from elsewhere. So you can think of the medium scenario as not just returning to higher birth rates, but also returning to a higher level of participation from the existing housing stock. So don't get too up in the specific number in the birth rate itself. Think more in terms of what it means for the school district. Second, in terms of age, shouldn't we look at the age of the residents and all that kind of stuff? That is extremely difficult to do. The data to do that really aren't available. It's somewhat elusive even if you do it. So again, modeling is all about figuring out what you can do based on the information you have available in the time of the universe. And going straight to the birth rate is much more straightforward and illustrates what needs to be illustrated, I think, appropriately.
Were you done with that question?
Yes.
Okay, the second question deals with the area used for analysis, specifically commentary around the quality of school districts and the impact of rent and rental properties on the analysis area. So I think that's you two, right?
It is, yes. So let's talk about the PUMS for a second. The PUMS publishes information in what are called PUMAs, public use microdata areas. And that's what you see illustrated on the map. So it's not like you can pick, well, just this part of a PUMA and not that part. You have to take either the whole thing or not at all. And we need to have a certain number of them so that we can get reliable results. So we picked these because they were the closest. They may not be perfect, but they're the closest you can get to the school district and be contiguous or close to contiguous. So we could have literally gone in different directions and picked different PUMAs. We didn't because we didn't feel those are the right ones or better. We thought this was the best combination of PUMAs that we could get that addressed the actual question of what they gave us enough data and let us address the question. In terms of gross rent, or I think better to probably look at household income or house value, and you see PUMAs that are chosen in addition to the PUMAs that there are two PUMAs that the school district rests in, and the other 5 sort of straddle the household income. Some are higher, some are lower, and the same with median value, house value. Some are higher, some are lower. So I think it's a pretty good representation.
And then the third question is for Eric, was about capacity analysis, and should we look at the ideal versus max analysis in classrooms?
So these weren't state numbers as much as district numbers. We have capacities in the district, I mentioned earlier, a maximum of 20 students in the kindergarten, 23 in the first grade, and 25 in the rest of the grades. That's the capacity. We don't want to go above that. That doesn't mean that we want to meet that in every class. It's just the school district saying that this is as many students as we want in any given classroom. And I think ideally the goal is to have less than that. And part of the efficiency factors in the fact that you're never going to go above that. If you had 20 and you take a 0.85, you're at 18 students in a classroom or in a kindergarten classroom. So that's really a discussion at the district level as to how many students that you want to have in there in a classroom. And we back it out knowing that you don't want to ever go above that. And that's what the different efficiency factors assist with. Hopefully that answers your question.
May I just add that all these questions go to looking at specifics relating to our district and what's most relevant to us versus the ability to conduct an analysis using data that is available. And so I would suggest that points to more for using scenario 2 or 3 to balance out the factors that we can't really control in the analysis. That's what I would suggest. Okay, sorry to interject here, but okay. Would anyone else like to come up to the microphone? Please introduce yourself and welcome.
Hi guys, it's Susan Coney. I live at 9 Barcliff Road in Chappaqua. I have 2 kids in the district at Bell. My comments parallel what Sid said, but I have maybe a couple of additional things, and I apologize, I made notes on my phone as we went through this. I guess I'll start with the multipliers, piggyback off what Warren was mentioning. On the multipliers, in addition to looking at actual condos and apartment complexes in the CCSD territory, why, as Sid mentioned, did we not use high-performing school districts as opposed to the regional ones? I know we just addressed this, but just to put a finer point on it, even the David Rutgers analysis that you all mentioned shouldn't be used, is very clear that in districts like ours where the quality of the schools are so impactful that you should adjust those multipliers to reflect the high-performing nature of the schools and not simply use a geographic or regional set of data. On housing mix, as others pointed out, there's no real support for the housing mix in the DGEIS at all. So using that as the basis for the mix of 1 and 2 bedrooms is arbitrary and not borne out by recent comparables. As Howard pointed out, this is incomparable to 91 Bedford, but it's also not comparable to Chappaqua Crossing, the Cupola building, which has a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments, as well as 91 condos, of which 20 are 3 bedroom units, and the rest are 2 bedrooms. There's not a single 1 bedroom apartment or condo in that development, at least to my knowledge. The form-based code contains no limits on the types of units and bedroom mix, so given the nature of the town and the school district, it seems logical that there would be a preponderance of larger units as opposed to these 1 bedrooms. From the slide where you showed the swap from 1 to 2 bedroom units, it's obvious that this entire analysis is very sensitive to that assumption. So I think we need to probably put a finer point on that rather than just taking the numbers that are in the DGEIS as a given, because I think it significantly underestimates the number of larger units and therefore the number of kids that would be in the district. And if you just take those 2 things alone, the entire subsequent analysis about financial impact, capital investments, taxes, capacity issues all hinge on these key assumptions. Assuming the multipliers are too low and housing mix underestimates larger units, changing these 2, I suspect, would have a very major impact on the outcome of the entire analysis. And then at the minimum, I would think you would want to see a sensitivity analysis around those issues. Echoing what Sid said on class sizes, like I was on the PTA executive committee for 2 years, people would line up to complain when class sizes went from 17 to 18 to 19 kids. You're talking about maxing out at 20, 23, and 25. You're going to have a line of irate people standing here yelling at you on a daily basis. So yeah, I get it that you have to use some number for the analysis. I would think maybe looking at both the max as well as maybe an average of what it's been traditionally would maybe give you a good idea of capacity at the levels that the district likes to, or has been able to provide to the people who send their children to these schools versus a maximum analysis. And then my last comment.
The board needs to extend.
Yes.
We can.
This one's my last one.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to.
sorry.
Lisa's got to be able to report it, so. you have to
Warren
make
and
a motion.
Jean?
Yes.
Okay, we're all agreed. Okay.
Thanks, guys. On the tax impact, the tax analysis doesn't seem to look at how tax increases would be spread across existing homeowners, fee simple homeowners who currently are paying taxes in the district, as well as the incremental 1,000 units or whatever it is from the build out. And I guess the reason this is important is that, yes, so taxes are going up 2, 3, 4, whatever the percent is every year. It's likely over the tax cap. How much of that is being borne by people who are currently paying taxes in the district now versus those coming in? And the reason that's important is because, as everybody knows, apartments and condos are taxed at a different, lower rate than fee simple homes. So it's, I think, important for us to know, okay, so overall taxes are going up 2, 3, 4%, but existing homeowners, your taxes are going to go up more than that because you're the ones that are bearing the brunt of those increased taxes. And then I would just, last thing is, if we're increasing taxes above the tax cap, assuming, we can't just assume we're not going to get those tax increases because they're capped at a certain point. So we need to start, I would think we would want to look at what programs or educational offerings would have to be cut by the district if we're exceeding those tax cap increases on an annual basis. That's it. Thank you so much for your time, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Oh, these were statements, okay. Okay, anyone else, please feel free to come up to the microphone.
Thank you, Board of Education. This is Marianne McGuire, my maiden name, Marianne O'Connor. I have 2 boys in the school district. My question really is, will the public have an opportunity to ask further questions of the consultants? Because there were many, many people who wanted to attend this evening in person and were not able to. And my understanding is that questions are not able to be submitted by Zoom. So I'm just asking if you could answer that question, whether the public can submit comments to the Board of Education. A lot of people have questions on the analysis. I have a couple of questions myself regarding, for example, the 15-year estimate for the build-out, and whether that's simply based on the town board's assumption that would be the time period. And if it's not, then I think we need to, look at whether the school can address staffing needs that might arise on a short-term basis if these buildings come quickly. And then another comment relates to the analysis that was done when Chappaqua Crossing was being considered, and empty nesters selling their homes to residents that then brought families with them. So if that analysis can be looked at as well. Thank you.
Okay, so there's 2 questions in there. The first,
Thank you.
Thank you. The first is, will the public have an opportunity to ask further questions of the consultants? Maybe I can answer that. That's okay. So right now, this is our public meeting that we have planned with our consultant team. If for some reason the board asked the consultants to do future work, we would have another public meeting where there would be an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions of the consultants. However, John Chow worked with our consultant team, and Eric is our architect, so we will be able to field questions from community members. They should send them to John directly, and so we'd be able to support that work. And of course, they can send any additional questions to the Board of Education. The second is the 15-year estimate for the build-out. So who would like to answer that question?
I think that's me again.
Whether it was based on the town board's assumption.
Well, we actually assumed a 10-year build-out. That was not based on the town's assumption. It was based on 10 years took us to the end of our analysis at the time. And that seemed like if you're going to build it out, let's do it have to build it out sooner. That gives you an opportunity to see how it impacts the enrollment. The timing of these things is always uncertain. So it's possible that if you model the 15-year build out and it happens sooner, that isn't as good to me as a modeler as if you model a 10-year build out and it actually takes 15 years. So they're called more conservative. It gives you an idea of anything that's going to happen is going to happen relatively sooner. You can see it and make plans for it.
Okay. Anyone else, so please come up to the microphone. Okay, so that finishes off our public comment for our consultant's presentation, and we'll go to public comment again for general comments later. Yes, Hillary.
Can I ask a follow-up question, sort of spark? Sorry, I keep forgetting. Okay, I have just a quick question, sort of based on the questions that were asked here tonight and also the conversation we had. Some of the questions we asked when you first made the proposal and we were asking through them. And I guess the question I have is a lot of the concern and our concern in sort of prompting, asking you all to do this work is that we are a district that is unique in that families choose to move here because of the schools. And so I think that some of the questioning around the PUMS data and why did you choose this, and I guess the question I'm left with is what people are sort of circling around, the idea of doing a specific PUMS analysis, a specific multiplier for, Westchester school districts with really good schools. Like, is that something that's even feasible to do? Or is that such a small data set that that's why we looked more geographically?
It's such a small data sector, and you don't have enough housing stock data related to those small communities to really assess it as part of the problem. You can't just do one for Chappaqua and Bronxville and Scarsdale and Greenwich and New Canaan or something like that, because those are the highest performing districts. You need to have more of a regional approach. When we looked at it, we had some counties in there which we said aren't representative. Originally, it looked into Rockland County and looked into Putnam and Dutchess County. Those aren't representative of this area. So the regions that we chose were the most representative and provided enough data so that we could have an analysis at all. Now, whether or not there should be a factor for high-performing districts within that bumps it up, that's beyond my pay grade. So maybe Peter wants to respond a little bit more to that.
So to follow up on what Mary said, what we did was basically the smallest geography we could do and still get numbers that were reliable. So we went as tightly as we could. We included as many high-performing districts as we could.
Thank you. And I just felt like that, clarifying that, I think is helpful.
Yeah, I mean, we'd love to do, pick something that's exactly like you, but the data don't allow it. And the fact that we can even do this is really, really impressive.
I do think it's important we thank our consultants. Done a lot of work.
Very much so. Thank you.
Absolutely. To be able to provide us and the town with comprehensive information.
A really tremendous amount of work and extremely helpful.
And thank you for coming all the way down here. I'm of course not speaking to Eric, but I am speaking to our other friends for being here tonight, providing us with this information. So thank you.
We really appreciate the work in a record amount of time, and your being here during COVID. We really appreciate that commitment and the work that you've done for us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the tremendous
Right, so
work.
we're going to just take a second to transition. David, we're going to go right into the budget presentation, but we got to move the stage around. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Is everybody ready?
I guess you don't do it.
Right now.
I'll do it myself.
We lost almost our entire audience, but I see Kelly.
We're going to make it through this night.
Glad you're still here.
Hi,
Kelly.
Kelly up there. We love you, Kelly.
All right, is the Kelly back there? Good. All right, so,
Wait,
and
hold on.
Who's back there? Is Peggy up there too? No. I can't see.
Our treasurer. That's our treasurer. Okay, Christine, your superintendent's report? Or
Yes,
we're going to do the budget presentation first.
Okay.
And then I'll do the superintendent's report.
Okay, very good.
All right, so tonight is the night that John and I do a very brief overview of the budget planning process. So we're going to go through our slides, and you'll see our structure and our foundation is typically the same at the first meeting during the budget process. And then as we move into budget season, we start to be more granular about what we feel we'll be presenting to the board for your consideration for adoption. Okay, so just this is an overview of when we start our budgeting process. We begin in August and it continues all throughout the fall semester. Obviously, it's been a little bit more challenging anticipating what our needs are going to be moving forward because of the pandemic, but we are continuing to talk to our administrative staff and to our teacher teams to be sure that we are providing an appropriate program for our kids, no matter what our conditions are going to be come September. Oops, let me go back for a second. So the two main factors that we consider when we're crafting our budget are based on our strategic questions. The first is how to provide an excellent program that's fiscally responsible, but continue. The second goes into student learning and how do we create an environment where students think deeply, support their thinking skills, apply problem-solving skills, and actively participate in their learning as they acquire content knowledge. And then through our strategic planning, we've identified our skills and attributes that we would like to cultivate in our students throughout their K-12 experience. So we're thinking about that as we're crafting our programs. And then we're aligning to our strategic plan priorities in terms of using our instructional space to amplify learning, improving our district-wide assessment practices to communicate with our parents as well as with each other as students transition from grade to grade. We're continuing to work on aligning our social emotional curriculum and our overall academic program. And then finally using instructional technology tools to differentiate our instruction and personalize learning for our students. And of course, we're always talking when we're building our budget about our class size, about the programs that we're offering, our infrastructure, our buildings, our brick and mortar, and then making sure we're at meeting all of our contractual obligations with our units. So this is just all these different circles represent all the criteria that we're thinking about as we're going through our planning together to present different aspects of the budget for your consideration. And in terms of our operating standards, they are similar over time because we feel like they provide a strong foundation for learning within this district. So maintaining our class size ratios or professional learning, maintaining teaming at the middle schools, maintaining a deep core course offering for our students and extracurricular program, making sure our students have cross-disciplinary experiences, making sure our buildings are safe and clean, well-maintained, making sure our offices are efficient for our families, and then of course we're always looking at overtime and ways to reduce those expenditures. So some of the things that are really challenging this year about the budgeting process is obviously COVID-19 and planning for next year. Whether we're going to be in a similar structure or not may be unknown at the time that we're recommending a budget for your consideration. And then of course, state aid and how that might impact our planning given the economic stability of the state of New York based on how they've had to respond to the pandemic. And then some of the things that we'll solve along the way that are unknown right now are the impact of TRS, state aid, the bargaining contracts that are currently out for negotiation, CPI, the tax cap number, transportation costs, special education placements, and our assessed tax valuation. So as this board knows, since this is not your first time through the budget process, these things evolve as time moves on and decisions are made throughout the budgeting process. And then we always make sure that we clarify that our tax levy has not and will not increase as a result of our capital project work. And these are all the ways that we supported that $42.5 million bond. And then, of course, at a future meeting, we may talk about some capital projects that we may ask you to consider placing in front of the voters because these would have to be approved at the time of the budget will be approved. But we're still having conversations of what those could potentially be. But we'll have any of those considerations at our next budget presentation. Okay, so John, do you want to?
Yes.
Do you want to go?
Here, we just give you a brief look at the last few budgets. There are 7 budgets and 8 budgets and 7 changes. And you can go to the next slide. Okay, so these are the changes. If you look at the budget increases, average 1.67, and then tax levy increases 1.18. And then the next slide. And then so this is a larger number, size, so you can see. And I think the numbers, we try to be very reasonable. And
Jen, you want to keep going?
okay, so in the property tax cap, I think by this time everyone's so familiar with that. And I think Vicki mentioned it several times, that there's a tax cap. It's not exactly 2%, but it's 2% or CPI, whichever is lower. And then there are some other factors. And I think today I just read it somewhere that next year is the tax cap, the CPI is at 1.35% or 1.25, somewhere around there. But then I went online, I saw it's 1.4, so I'm not sure right now. We know it's going to be low.
Okay, so our next steps in our budget development process are resolving our unknowns, which I just shared many of them with you, finalizing our personnel the best that we can, given our situation that we're currently in, identifying additional areas that we can have some cost savings, and then at that point, I'll be able to share a more comprehensive budget with the Board of Education at our March 3rd meeting, which is on our budget calendar. So as we plan for future presentations, perhaps it might be best, given the time that we're at tonight, that if there are any questions that you want us to make sure that we're thinking about and addressing at the first presentation in March, if you could send those to John and I within the next month, so that can shape some of our slides for you as we plan the first phase of the budget process. Okay, great. Okay, does that sound good? Great. Okay, and so this is just a preview of the budget calendar. So our next meeting is March 3rd, 2021. All right, thank you, John.
So, Christine, I just want to mention, the only thing I would mention now as you think about this is looking at the operating standards. I would like to see some language regarding the anti-racism and equity work that we're doing, considering that, we have hired a new director of equity and inclusion, and we're going to be doing programs. We've invested quite a bit in professional development. So I'd like to see, we know that work needs to be supported, so maybe you could include that in the operating standards along with, social and emotional curriculum.
Yes, if I may, we're meeting next week with the Strategic Planning Committee, the steering committee, and we're talking about whether or not we're going to adjust our strategic plan to include that as a target area. So I was thinking that it might make sense to allow that process to occur, because let's say that strategic plan is not adjusted, then I can place it in the operating standards. But if the strategic plan is adjusted, then it'll be part of that portion of the presentation.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Very good. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, John.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so now, David, we need to move into the superintendent's presentation for the community update. And Adam and Tony and I are going to do this together as quickly as possible. So I want to start by acknowledging, I know that Vicki did at the beginning of the meeting, and I want to thank her, and I want to thank her for co-authoring the letter that we had sent to our parents about how we were going to support our students and our staff after the riots at the Capitol. And so in that letter, we shared with our community not only our concerns about what was happening in our community and in our country, but also some of the ways that we were going to move forward and support our students both educationally and emotionally. But I wanted Adam just to share, because he had met with all of the faculty the morning after. So I wanted him to share with the community, because this was not in the letter, the way that he framed how he suggested teachers approach the day instructionally with our students. So, Adam?
Yeah, so this was particularly challenging because things happened so fast on Wednesday, late afternoon and into the evening, and information was pouring in as we were trying to create resources for teachers to be able to address these things appropriately at a variety of grade levels the next morning. And so I just want to publicly thank the whole professional development team, the administrators that are on this stage. Philip was an invaluable new resource for us as we kind of scoured the web and our resources that we had about talking with students about challenging situations in general, but also some more specific age-appropriate resources for students. So we were able to pull together 2 meetings before school, one for the secondary level, one for the elementary level, and talk to the faculty about how to approach these things, and you know, had remarks that were aligned to the letter that the Board of Education and Dr. Ackerman had sent, and provided some kind of guidelines for teachers with regard to how to approach this. And you can see a summary, just a very short summary of the 5 points that I made for faculty in those meetings. The first one was about engaging students when you as an educator, but also your students are emotionally ready. It was traumatic for so many of us to see those events unfold, and to be ready to have educational conversations about them the next morning was really challenging. So we needed to give our administrators the time and space to be able to appropriately center themselves so that they could do the appropriate things in the classrooms with our students. The second point was about honoring and caring for our BIPOC students and staff. This was traumatic for so many of us, but I think more so in many cases for our BIPOC students and staff. And so I asked our faculty to really dig deep to understand the impact of race and how it played out with those events, and also to kind of double down on our commitment to disrupt the racist structures that exist and make sure our students are ready to do that work with us. The third one is about having a strong instructional plan. I reiterated with the faculty that there is no race to do this. The important thing is to do it really well. So to take the time to develop a good, strong instructional plan, choosing your resources very carefully, your protocols with which you'll engage students very carefully. This isn't the kind of conversation that an educator can just kind of wing off the cuff with students. So that was the third point. Utilizing colleagues and expertise. This kind of event pushes some of our educators that are not fully trained in engaging in these types of conversations into them. So we have social studies teachers, for example, that are highly trained in order to have conversations about politics and current events. We have others that don't have that kind of experience. We have clinicians that are well prepared and counselors that are well prepared to support our students socially and emotionally. However, some people don't have that level of training, so that point was about making sure that we really network with each other and utilize the expertise that we have. And then the last thing was really about we weren't sure what kind of conversations our students would be engaging in, the kinds of things that they might bring into our schools. So the fifth point was about being really ready to address anything that isn't aligned with our organizational values with regard to what we stand for as a district. So that was the fifth point. So overall, it was, I think, extremely successful. Those conversations continue as we go through the week past and certainly events coming up onto the inauguration, which I know Dr. Ackerman's going to mention here.
Right, so I just wanted to share that we'll continue having those curricular conversations with our teachers as we prepare for next Wednesday, but we're going to take a few extra steps based on maybe some concerns that our families may have about students being in school next Wednesday for half a day on inauguration day. So on that day specifically, we'll have police presence at all 6 buildings rather than just Dick Greeley while students are there. And we're making sure that our principals are reviewing our safety plans with our faculty. Just so our families can find comfort that we understand that this is a challenging time for so many of our families and for our students and for our staff, and we want people to feel fully supported and safe on that particular day. And I've been receiving some feedback around concerns about inauguration and what are we doing to help support safety within our buildings, particularly because we're in a high-profile community that has high-profile people who live here. So this is some of our thinking as we go into next week. And if we have to make more adjustments based on additional information that we learn along the way, we will certainly do it at that time. Okay, so I want to just talk about COVID. So we'll do our CCSD schedule update. So we're still 100% in K through 8, 50% of the students in the morning. At Greeley, are on site, and then they go home for instruction for the other half of the day. Unless there are students who have specific needs, they're allowed to stay all day at Greeley and have a full day schedule. I wanted to share with you our remote students for this week. They're high across the district, but I'm going to provide a side-by-side comparison at the next meeting so we can understand if that pattern is going to continue or if this pattern is specifically related to travel and self-quarantining after the holiday break. Also, it's our hope, and we're going to, Andrew specifically is going to send out communication to Greeley students and families that now that the quarantine and exposure guidance has changed, we're hoping that more students will start attending school on site again. Tony, I wanted him to give a brief staffing update.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. So I just highlighted the two spots that were most important and that they were different from the last update that we provided you last month. So there is a high school special education vacancy, a probationary position that has not been filled as a probationary position, but we broke it up so it's been filled by a part-time person and covered internally. We will post the position for September as a probationary position, but I do want you to know it's covered and there's consistent coverage in that position. Additionally, the FFCRA provision has expired. It was a federal provision that allowed for those intermittent childcare leaves, paid childcare leaves that we did navigate in the fall. But as of December 31st, that expired. And so our process moving forward would be to work with teachers one-on-one if they do encounter childcare issues as their school districts potentially go remote or children have to quarantine. And we consulted with David Shaw about how to proceed in those cases, being that this provision is no longer in place.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, so we wanted to share with you our quarantine numbers. So we've been doing this every presentation. So this is where we were in December 8th at our last meeting, and this is where we are today. So you would expect that after a holiday break that our numbers would dramatically reduce because we've had a period of time where no students have been on site. So we've been able to work through those quarantines, and now we have students that are back on campus. But I anticipate that it'll remain this way, and the reason I anticipate that is because of how we've now responded to COVID positive cases. So one of the things that we plan on doing is we plan on now on Friday sending out a communication to all parents of our COVID positive cases in the district, because there are likely to be more situations where we have had a COVID positive person on site, but there's no quarantining associated with them being on site because of the new direction received from the Westchester Department of Health. So our thought process is that on Friday, I'll push this out to the community. So what we'll do is by building, we'll have the number of new cases that week for people that are in our buildings. And then I also want to share the number of new cases for remote individuals that are reported. That's typically at the high school. And then I want to report the number of students and staff who have to quarantine because of new cases that week. So then parents have a broad understanding of what's happening in the school. District-wide. However, if we have a case in a building where we have a number of kids and adults who need to quarantine, I will send a letter out to that specific building, and that magic number will likely be 5. So if we have a case in a building and 5 or more people need to quarantine, that's going to kick up enough conversation where I'm going to send something out to that specific building. So that's the thought process about how we're going to move forward here. That way I'm not just sending out letters about cases that don't impact anybody.
So is it with the new guidance now, if kids are in class together all day, if they're in their masks all day, they don't have to quarantine?
Well, why don't we talk about that? Thank you. Great transition.
You should ask him.
So the Department of Health, Westchester Department of Health, so we've been in this for 6 months. So based on their experience and what they know and their data, they released new guidance last Friday to the superintendents, which I shared with the community. But here are the most important factors that I think are important for the community's consideration. So when you're masked in the building, you are only considered a close contact, and you have to quarantine, or you're going to be excluded from school if you're within 6 feet of another person who who's masked for 10 or more minutes during the school day. So we would have to be next to each other with our masks on, 6 feet or less for 10 or more minutes for me to be excluding a child who's not COVID positive from school. So because of the way that our program's set up, we don't have this problem anymore. Unless a child or an adult reports to us that they were in someone's space for that amount of time within our building, which we have a part of our reporting procedures now for parents. The other place where students would have to quarantine if they have a mask on is if they're on the bus next to a child who's COVID positive for 10 or more minutes within 6 feet. And that's, let's say you're in the middle row, it's the seats behind and it's the seats in front. So what we've done in transportation is that Seth has removed children from the 6-foot barrier of the driver. So the driver now will never have to quarantine because a positive child's on the bus, but the children may have to quarantine if someone positive is on the bus and they're seated within 6 feet of them. So I think probably our quarantining, if we have to do it, will be because kids rode the bus and there's positive people around them, and it'll be maybe 6 kids, or because maybe the kids are in small group instruction and there wasn't a way to keep that 6-foot distance. That's probably what we're going to see once we have all of our procedures set up. Now, what we're grappling with right now, and we're trying to figure out, is how we handle lunch. Because if you're in a big space and we have students that are eating, but they're beyond 6 feet, then they don't have to quarantine. But if they're eating in their classrooms and it's a regular size and it's a smaller space, it doesn't matter where they are, they have to quarantine. So we've moved kids out of the cafeterias at the elementary schools because we had classes in there, so those classes are moving. And we'll have kids eating in the cafeteria, and we're going to space them out the best we can. However, there might be situations where students have to quarantine because they're if you're sitting at a table, even if you're 6 feet apart, you still have to quarantine. But we're also going to try to, and there's a permit process we need to do, we're going to try to apply to the state to allow us to rent tents and heaters so kids will be able to eat lunch outside. So we're in that process right now, but that's going to take a little time. So in the meantime, we're going to leverage our cafeterias and our gym spaces probably in the middle school to be able to reduce the likelihood of students being exposed during lunch in our buildings. But this is complicated. But if you're at Greeley, kids need to come back because there's no exposure. But there's no exposure, there's no lunch here. You keep your mask on the whole time you're here, and you just stay 6 feet apart from your classmates. So you're not going to get a call from me unless you're in a team sport and you're playing another child and you're interacting with each other. You're not going to get a call saying you need to quarantine due to exposure at school. So it's my hope that these new provisions will help us get the kids back into Greeley. So by Friday, we're going to communicate out to parents K-8 how we're going to be handling the bus and how we're going to be handling lunch. Okay? This is just a summary of what I just said. And then I'm going to send an email out to parents letting them know about our new communication process when there's positive cases with our first communication at the end of the week, like how I envision us doing this moving forward. And then, so the other two things that I wanted to share with you is that Adam has been working with John and Joe Gramando, has set up our system to test our kids and our staff if we need to. We did some dry runs today. We were approved over the break as a lab site apart from the department, the Westchester Department of Health. So we're attempting to see if we can order tests right now. We put in an order for tests. If we were able to secure some, we may do surveillance testing beginning with our staff, but I have to see if we're able to get them first. Other districts are engaged in surveillance testing with the BINEX tests provided by the Department of Health. But the districts who I know are doing that right now primarily were designated as a zone. So I don't know many schools that weren't designated as a zone that are using the Department of Health Binex test to surveillance tests. But if we do receive them, we will start. We may start with our staff. So we'll start, and we'll start engaging in our process. But at this point, we won't be doing anything unless we receive the tests. And then I also want to share with you that we had sent out multiple communications to our staff about vaccination. And we had a meeting with them so they understood the sign-up process. We aren't able to do that on campus right now for our staff, but we haven't heard of any of our staff having a hard time making appointments, and I know that many of our staff have already been able to go and receive the first vaccination, but it is voluntary at this point. The State Health Department would need to tell us that our staff needs to be vaccinated in order for us to say that that would need to happen, and they haven't done that. They haven't done that for kids yet either, but this is still new, so we're going to move forward, and staff who want to be vaccinated are getting vaccinated, and so that's where we are with this process. I just wanted to provide a zoner property update, and because I think it's important that I do that as I'm working with these contractors. So right now, there is information at the DEP that needs to be approved, and that's a process that may take up to 45 days. There's information at the Department of Health. Our attorney is going back and forth with the planning board attorney. There's multiple documents that need to be fleshed out as we move towards final approval of the Zoder property subdivision. And then we're working with the Department of Public Works on some aspects of the work that still needs to be done in order to receive final approval for subdivision. So at the next meeting, I'll have a better understanding if we're on target to hit our March 5th deadline of having our final documentation in front of the planning board, or if we'll need an extension. So I just wanted to mention that that work is ongoing. Adam.
So we're really excited. We were able, you'll see agenda item 5.7 is we're requesting that you approve a contract for Matthew Kay to come in and do some professional development, to do a keynote for our faculty at 3:30 on the 27th, and then he will stay virtually to engage with our administrative team and the Board of Education for our mini administrative retreat on the evening of the 27th before the board meeting. Matthew Kay, as you can see there, he's a teacher in Philadelphia, but he also is an author of this book, Not Light But Fire, and our administrative team and professional development team have come together to engage in a book club led by Philip Marcus and Jen Thompson, who's one of our professional developers. So we've been engaged in this book club over the last month or so. It's going to continue, and the book was really well received by the professional development team and the administrators, so we were excited to be able to secure Matthew to come in. He actually ran a webinar that was like kind of a free webinar for educators across the country just yesterday, so we were able to listen in and get a little sample of what he's all about. We think it's going to be a really great fit for us, and he's got some great things in the book that'll help us engage in just really good, meaningful conversations about race in our classrooms. And I think we have copies for the Board of Education. I see a couple around, so please take a look through, and we look forward to having Matthew in the district to help us move our work forward around racism on January 27th.
And then did you want to talk about the grant on the agenda?
Yeah, if I could. So we approved several grants at the last board meeting from the Newcastle United for Youth. But there's one more that we ask that you approve. It's 5.4 on the agenda. And this grant is for professional development and time for our physical education teachers to develop or further develop their SEL curriculum. So we've integrated at every level mindfulness moments into our PE curriculum, and so we're working hard to kind of diversify what that looks like, to be really present, to have that pause and kind of take that moment. So you'll see we posted a couple of tweets from our physical education Twitter account. On the left side, you can see the mood meter, the ruler mood meter on the bottom left there, where they're incorporating some mindful moments, and they're using the CASEL indicators for SEL in order to do that work, as well as ruler. And on the right side, you can see, actually that picture is back from September, but it made me feel really good that the sky was so blue, and I know it's turf, but it was nice to see the kids outside, so I figured I'd put it in there even though it was a few months old. But those are Greeley students at the end of the period, engaging in a mindful moment just to ground themselves to be ready for their classes when they, move on to them the next period. So we appreciate the generous grant from the Newcastle United for Youth. It really fits really well with our SEL push and ruler and integrates into our PE curriculum. So that's exciting, led by Jason Simo and Greg Gitland.
And then I just wanted to finish up by mentioning we have 2 semifinalists again this year for Regeneron, so we'll be inviting them to a future board meeting with Andrew, probably virtually, to just hear about their research and congratulate them. And by the time we meet again, we'll know if either of them reach finalist status. But it's such an incredible honor to be in this phase of the competition. So congratulations, Alexandra and Lori. We're proud of you. That's great. All right, and that concludes the superintendent's report. That's great. Thank you,
Christine and everyone else. So now, let's see. We are up to committee reports. Let's see. Anything on policy?
Nothing on policy. I will say the Wellness Committee met yesterday. Thank you again to Kelly and the PTA for helping us push out our, if you have 3-minute videos. We are going to continue the process, and we may sort of do a repeat of the ones we pushed out right before break this month, just because it was right before break and not sure how many people got a chance to see it. But we're going to continue that rollout, and I think it's been a really great initiative, and thank you to Ellen for leading this committee, and I think it's great. That's it.
Green Committee's meeting next week.
And for communications, we have an advisory committee meeting that we had to reschedule, but we'll be doing that in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and we have a regular communications meeting coming up in a couple of weeks too. But
that's right.
They're like 2 weeks down the road.
That's right. Jane, I know you had something to report.
Got 2 brief things. Meetings with the sports boosters. There's still the more high-risk winter sports are still very much in limbo. But some of the low risk started. There have been challenges there, especially with indoor track, which was a low risk sport, and the Armory got pulled because of it's now a vaccination site. But I really want to give a shout out to Jason Simo and the boosters and everyone that's making the winter sports or whatever sports schedule we have as good as possible for the kids. They worked out something with Fox Lane for indoor track is going outdoors. They're swapping back. They have an arrangement with Fox Lane to try and keep some of these meets going. So I really think that they're doing all they can to give the kids as much of an experience as they can, and then we're still waiting on word on some other sports for the winter and spring. And then just briefly met with Chappaqua School Foundation, had a meeting the other night as well, and I just wanted to give a brief plug. They have a great at-home series on Monday the 25th. They have the chef of Goose Feather, one of the really great restaurants here that was just ranked like one of the top restaurants in Westchester. It's a dumpling night, so you can make a contribution to CSF. You can get all the ingredients and everything, and it's a virtual Zoom dumpling making class next Monday the 25th, actually, from 6 to 7. I'm doing it. I'm
what a great idea.
I'm doing it as well.
So I just wanted to say that there are no grants right now. I know they're working on the traditional grants, no ISTA grants right now, but obviously we're just back from the break, so I'm sure there'll be more on that later in the season.
Good, very good. Anything else? We have a CARES committee meeting. I did not write down the date.
It's next Tuesday, because at the end of this week, we have our survey that's going out to our students 6 through 12 that we'll be presenting at the next Board of Education meeting, but we're sharing the results with the CARES committee. That's right, next Tuesday night.
Okay, so that concludes committee reports. And now we are up to public comment. I see that we really only have one person in the audience who would possibly make a comment. So if you do, I invite you to the microphone. As you know, we limit your comment to 3 minutes. And please identify yourself.
My name is Kelly Mofield, and I'm the president of the Chappaqua PTA this year. And I just wanted to share the PTA and the parent community's thanks to the administrators again for all that you've been doing, and especially last week when we were all reeling with the current events in Washington and wondering, what to expect. Your immediate response and communication to the parent community and the faculty was really appreciated. It doesn't go unnoticed, and we do really appreciate that. And it was a hard day, but I heard from many parents in the community and my own children who all came home with things to tell me about what they had heard from their teachers that day, across the board, not just social studies teachers, but teachers in every different classroom. And so it really is appreciated, and it's a hard time, and I appreciate your comments tonight also about your plans for the upcoming weeks and what we're going to be going through as a community and a nation. And we have a lot of healing to do, and we appreciate you being part of that with our children in school. I also wanted to give a post-vacation, or pre-vacation, let's see, a post-vacation thank you for the pre-vacation production of ELF that was put on by the PTA's theater committee, and I wanted to just have a shout out to all the parents in the community who signed their children up to do that. It was a great success, and also to the administrators of both the middle schools who supported that and encouraged the kids and signed in and watched. They really appreciated it. So anyway, that's it. Thank you very much for everything.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Okay, so that concludes our public comment period. Let's move on to approvals and ratifications. May I have a motion to accept, for items 3.1 through 3.3, to accept the minutes of December 8th, 2020, and the minutes of December 15th, 2020, and January 5th, 2021. We have a motion and a second.
I'll second.
Any comments, any discussion on minutes? No, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Okay.
Recommend 4.1 instructional as presented.
I will move item 4.1 instructional as presented. May I have a second?
A second.
Any questions or comments?
I have a question.
Okay.
What you have looking right now. We're changing science coordinator and social studies coordinator to director positions. Why is that?
When we did the original appointment, they should have been named as director positions in the contract. There's a difference in stipend in the contract between coordinator and director, and they're serving in the role of director based on the level of work that they're performing with the staff.
Okay.
So that was my error.
Okay. Anything else? No? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Just want to acknowledge we had some pretty big retirements there, and we'll be celebrating our retirees in June. So they will, this was the first round of individuals who would retire because there's a stipend connected in the contract to early notification. So I just want to acknowledge our retirees this evening. Okay, so I present 4.2 non-instructional.
Okay, I will move item 4.2 non-instructional. May I have a second?
I'll second.
Any questions here? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. And now we move to our consent agenda. We have, well, first, may I ask for a motion and a second for items 5.1 through 5.7. I will move.
I'll second.
Second. Okay. What we have in the consent agenda are the CSD summaries. We have the health and welfare agreement, the summer school program, the gift from the Newcastle United for Youth that Adam talked about. We have a resolution that I'm going to ask either Christine or John to go over with us to explain. And then a hardware lease and the author engagement contract that Tony talked about. So go ahead, John. I would just like to get just a quick briefing on item 5.5, which is the municipal corporation agreement resolution.
Yes, 9LAF is our bank. That's where we put our funds. This is the New York Liquid Asset Fund, and they have a restructuring, and therefore we had to have a new resolution. Basically, it's still the same company, and all the funds there are collateralized. What that means is that they had to have securities to back up on all the funds that we deposited.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for John on the fund? Okay. So any other questions or comments on any of the items in the consent agenda? No? All right then, all in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye. Aye. Great, thank you. Okay, now in facilities, we have item 6.1, which is a change order. May I have a motion to acknowledge the change order in item 6.1? Okay, I will second. Any questions on this change order? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Okay, we move to the financials. May I have a motion to approve items 7.1 through 7.5 to acknowledge receipt of the revenue status report, the appropriation status report, claims auditor's report, treasurer's report, and extra classroom activity fund quarterly reports, all dated December 2020. May I have a motion? And a
One of
second,
them,
please?
the claims auditor is November, I believe.
Oh, correct. That's right. Thank you. May I have a motion and a second? I'll second. Any questions on the financial reports? Okay. All in favor, please say aye. Okay. And we're up to notice of future meetings. That was a short week. Okay. Our next meeting will be Wednesday, January 27th at 7:30 p.m. We will have our anti-racism and social justice education update. This will be at the auditorium at Horace Greeley High School. And then Wednesday, February 10th at 7:30 at the Horace Greeley High School auditorium. And may I now have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I will move to adjourn at 10:27.
Okay. 30 seconds. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. And good night.